This week on The Thinking Muslim, we're joined by Mother Agapia Stephanopoulos, who has lived and served in the West Bank. She shares her first-hand account of the challenges facing Palestinian Christians under Israeli occupation and reflects on how some Christian institutions have aligned themselves with the Israeli state at the expense of their religious principles.
All we ever hear is the Israeli narrative, when in reality it's not that at all.
There was this horrific video recently of an Israeli settler violently pushing a nun to the floor and kicking
to
her.
the cement ground,
To the cement ground and kicking
So,
her.
the Prime Minister of Israel assassinated by a Jewish zealot, the Wadi Nar checkpoint. The Israeli soldier says, "Give me your crosses, give me the little icons they had on their dashboard." The churches weren't demolished under Islam. Both Muslims and Christians in Palestine are victims of the occupation. With Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey, and thankfully Tucker for starting to open that door and make people more aware.
Israel is committing, aggression not only in Gaza but also the West Bank,
And throughout Lebanon, Syria.
and throughout Lebanon, Syria, and
The ultimate goal is to rid the land of all Palestinians.
right-wing movement that's brewing, and they usually use St. George as sort of the symbol.
But it's just ironic that St. George comes from Palestine and is honored by the Christians and the Muslims there.
Why Palestine is so important to you.
This is like breaking the wall between heaven and earth.
Mother Agapia Stephanopoulos, welcome to The Thinking Muslim. I'm really honored to have you with us today.
Appreciate being here. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, thank you for coming along. Now, we're today going to talk about Palestine and your time in the West Bank. I think you've spent a number of years. How many years?
I lived there from 96 to 2006.
Right, and you're principally there as a teacher?
Greek Orthodoxy. I was there as a monastic, as a nun, living in a convent. But after the first 2 years, our church did have a school.
Okay.
So I was assigned to the school in Al Azariya, East Jerusalem, primarily Muslim community, Palestinians. Yeah, so lived there for 10 years and was kind of forced out because I had spoken out about how the wall was affecting our community. But every year since 2009, I take pilgrims back every year, twice a year, and also would bring young Palestinians in the summertime to our convent to America when we could. Now America denies visas to Palestinians, whether it's medical, tourist, or to enter the country. So I've kept that close connection with people in the West Bank. Yeah.
Right. And when we talk about Palestine, of course, we inevitably refer to it, in particular Jerusalem, as the home to the three monotheistic faiths, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. But of course, Christianity has a special root, deep root to the land. Tell me about why Palestine is so important to you. You're a Greek Orthodox nun. You follow a form of Christianity that has a very special connection with Christ, and of course Muslims have we have our own view and connection about to Christ. Why is Palestine so important to you?
Well, it's first of all, it's self-evident, right? It is the land where Christ revealed himself. So that's and Greek Orthodoxy is the original Christianity. Everything else moved from that, Catholicism and Protestantism. So in the land of Palestine now, most of the current day Christians are either Greek Orthodox or the Greek Orthodox faith or Catholic, right? So they have that tie. And the reality is Christ revealed himself as a man, which was what had been prophesied in the Jewish texts in the land of Palestine. Gabriel appeared to the Virgin Mary in Nazareth, in the north of Palestine. He was born in Bethlehem. He performed his miracles on the Sea of Galilee, in Jericho, in Burkin. He healed the 10 lepers next to the town of Jenin. So everything in the cities and towns of Palestine is permeated with Christianity. And you feel it in the land too. In our texts, it talks about how when Christ was crucified in Jerusalem, or resurrected, that the tombs opened up. And so this is like stopping the divide breaking the wall between heaven and earth. And you feel it to this day when a Palestinian thinks about who they are, a Palestinian Christian. In America, we think about maybe we have a connection to the indigenous Indians as our history, and maybe we think about George Washington, something 400 years ago. But for a Palestinian Christian, their legacy is Christ and his followers from the very beginning. So We can't escape it.
And your interview with Tucker Carlson, I mean, it's a phenomenal interview. And, I still receive clips from relatives, little snippets of that interview. It reached 2 million views on YouTube. Since that interview, have you seen a shift in attitudes in America in particular towards Palestine and Palestinians?
Yes, I mean, I am grateful to Tucker because I think in his discernment of how people think and act, he realized that sadly not the voice of a Palestinian, but the voice of an old American nun living in Palestine and witnessing to what was happening there could break through to the American populace and make them see that, to hear that something they haven't been hearing.
Yeah.
All we ever hear is the Israeli narrative that they're extremist Muslims and they're out to get everybody, and that's what the conflict's all about, when in reality it's not that at all. That both Muslims and Christians in Palestine are victims of the occupation, which is being fueled by America. And so we began to see, at least seeped out, some of the pictures from Gaza of the tragedy of the genocide that was happening, even though you still don't have Western reporters allowed to be there, and horrors are being committed in the West Bank right now. But it started to come out, and Tucker's interview helped that. So yes, and you see it in the polls. The Democratic Party right now, I think it's like 70 or 80% of Democrats now support Palestine rather than Israel. So there's been a seismic shift, and on the right as well, with Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massey, and thankful to Tucker for starting to open that door and make people more aware.
Please visit btml.us/thinkingmuslim to donate now. I mean, for me, that's really the phenomenon here, because of course, we've seen that slow, steady shift in left-wing or progressive support for Palestine for some time, and of course, the Gaza genocide just exacerbated and made it much more clearer that Israel is committing aggression not only in Gaza but also the West Bank.
But throughout Lebanon, Syria.
And throughout Lebanon, Syria, and the wider
part
region.
Part of the greater Israel plan.
Absolutely. But of course, the right had stubbornly stuck with their sort of pro-Israel approach to world politics and we've seen people like Tucker have shifted the dial there. I mean, from your perspective, how far can that go?
That's a good question. I would hope we will get to the point where enough Americans that we will make a change. Well, you know what? To me, I've talked to this with many people now, informed people, because we're at a critical stage. I think a crisis stage. 25 years ago, I was saying there was a slow genocide by Chinese water torture happening, and now we're seeing the fulfillment of it, where there may be the Christian community is dwindling. So it's like there's this race. How quickly can we change American understanding of what's going on there? Because it's for sure in the next 5 years, look at everybody under 50 understands what's going on. It's sort of like compare when Biden was around and a young man.
Yeah.
You had the 67 war and you had Exodus. There was this whole mythology around Israel to support them. Now that's changed. Right. Now the next generation is going to be the Palestinians are the ones that we support and need to be following. Yeah. So that it's going to change. The problem is Israel is how much damage will they cause before we get to that point? Because that point will come. I'm confident of that now.
Mother Agapia, when I was younger and I was taught Islamic history, we were taught about the moment when the second caliph of Islam, Omar, he entered Jerusalem, he conquered Jerusalem, and there was a conversation between Omar and the heads of the church there in Jerusalem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and prayer time was dawning, and he was offered to commit his prayer in the church, and he refused, arguing that future generations may, revere him and build a mosque over that church. So there's been a relationship between Christianity and Islam, particularly in Palestine, which has been one of a symbiotic relationship, one of living together.
Yeah.
I mean, from your impression, you were there, over the last couple of decades, you've been in West Bank. Like, just describe the relationship you've seen between Muslims and Christians in Jerusalem and Palestine generally.
Yeah. So that it most closely came to my attention in 1998 when I was assigned to run our school in East Jerusalem in the town of Al-Azariya, which is a corruption of Lazarus, because that was Lazarus. The tomb was a quarter mile from our school. And it's protected to this day. There's a mosque next door to the church. But also, actually, there's a beautiful story just to connect that whole, can demonstrate the relationship right there.
Yeah.
In the early 2000s, our town was under curfew, like many others. And traditionally, the nuns from our convents on the top of the Mount of Olives would walk down to Bethany, to Al-Azariya, on Lazarus Saturday when we had the feast day, and go to the tomb, and we would pray there. During the curfew time, the curfew year, we had soldiers on the street. And so none of the nuns were able to come down, but the nun who lived with me and a couple of priests that were there, we said, it was 10 o'clock at night. We're going to go on the street and we're going to go up the road to Lazarus's tomb. And as we're going, we saw a few Israeli soldiers, and they let us pass. And we get to the tomb, and there's Aziz. There's the Muslim caretaker, a disabled man. His job was to let people in and out of the tomb. And he knew, oh no, I knew you would show up. So there was no one on the street. His home was right there, so he could be right there. So it was just showing the care and connection and respect between the two. It's one story to illustrate it.
Yeah. And generally speaking, when you were in Palestine, did you feel any resentment towards your presence there or towards Christians in general from many of the Muslims?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to whitewash things. I'm sure people will have an incident between Muslim and Christian and someone in the name of religion saying something. But in general, no. Like I said, our school had 350 students, kindergarten to Tamhidi to Tawjihi, kindergarten through high school. 98% of them were Muslim.
Right.
In the school, our icons, Christian images, and crosses till this day. The teachers were roughly half Muslim, half Christian. We all live in peace and work together. And quite frankly, and a lot of times I felt a closer connection to some of the Muslim women, who were the pious ones. We would have engage in discussions, and there was a commonality. There's aspects of the faith that are so similar. What I call prayer, almsgiving, care for the family. So you look to those things.
I mean, there was this horrific video recently of an Israeli settler violently pushing a nun to the floor and kicking her.
Cement ground,
to the cement ground and kicking her. There is this animosity that exists. Of course, we know the animosity exists generally towards Palestinians, but how widespread is this animosity towards Christians in particular in the Holy Land?
It's greatly increased over the, I think what gives maybe some power to my words is that I've witnessed, I moved there in May of 96, right? And Yitzhak Rabin had been killed, the prime minister of Israel, assassinated by a Jewish zealot 6 months before. And Netanyahu came into power certainly a little after then.
Yeah.
In the beginning at that time, direct attacks on Christians weren't so great budget. And that Jewish zealot movement wasn't very strong. The Yigal Amir who assassinated Rabin was sort of the outcast of Israeli society. Sadly, what we've seen over the last 25 years is Netanyahu and other politicians made a deal with the religious segment of the population, with Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and they have a parliamentary system, so that religious wing has become much more dominant in Israeli society. Right. There's no longer a peace camp to speak of. Most Israelis in general have been so indoctrinated to be fearful of the other side that they'll accept continuing the genocide. So what's happened is, where before the attacks against Christians were limited, now I just convey a couple stories. 2 years ago, I was traveling with a priest through a checkpoint in the northern West Bank. He had a big cross on him. We're at the checkpoint, and the soldier suddenly grabs and starts flipping his cross. And you never would have seen that before. And then when I was there this past September, I was sitting with some women from Bechala, near Bethlehem, a predominantly Christian area, and they're telling stories what happened to them at the checkpoint. And one described how that they were traveling between Jericho back to Bethlehem. They were at the Wadi Nar checkpoint. The Israeli soldier says, "Give me your crosses. Give me the little icons they had on their dashboard. Now give me a piece of paper." She wraps them up and throws them in the garbage.
Really?
Now, those kind of things just wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. But because they've so elevated the religious parties, it's become a way. Yeah. And sadly, the really critical thing is, you referred to Omar, is that, I remember visiting Mount Sinai. We take people there. Within the monastery of St. Catherine, there's a small mosque. So the thing is, in Judaism, with Islam, at least there's sense of connection between the two, respect of the prophets, and of the churches weren't demolished under Islam rule for the most part.
Yeah.
Under Judaism, what we're seeing now is they want to erase both the Muslim and the Christian presence. And that's becoming very apparent these days.
I mean, how widespread is that? And again, we see on social media, and it may be exaggerated, but the sort of the spitting on Christians generally, for settlers who spit on Christians. Is that a widespread?
Well, I mean, that happened years ago, even to myself, but occasional instances. But like they've grown more dominant. In the old city, it's divided, but they're intermingling: Jewish quarter, Armenian quarter, Muslim, Christian.
Yeah.
Now it's almost devoid of the Christian. The Jewish have bought homes and been able to take over apartments within the Christian Muslim quarters. So the presence of the other is so the occasions of spitting and the more aggression is just, it's widespread within Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Other parts you wouldn't see as much. And like I said, wouldn't say that the secular population engages in that kind of activity, but like I said, the youth are no longer people who are seeking a secular democratic Israel.
Really?
The youth are being educated in this religious zealotry. Yeah. So, of course, you're going to see an increase in the attacks. And the ugliness and the horror of what they're doing in the West Bank, the burning of cars, the graffiti threatening people. And, even now, it was on the outskirts, in the 70% of the West Bank that is actually more agricultural, where the Bedouins were, more open land, that's where the settlers were being most aggressive. But now they're reaching into the even predominantly Christian towns. People have heard about Taiba. I witnessed with my own eyes seeing settlers with guns supplied by America, with rifles, on the olive trees, the area there, not allowing the local Christians to be able to go to their to pick their olives. And in Bet Sahur, Shepherd's Field, just the other day, someone was telling me a story how settlers are there with guns actually entering the markets, which just never would have happened. And the brazenness of it, because quite frankly, the reality is the Western world will pick up on what's happening to Christians more than to Muslims. So the fact that they feel that they can get away with this now is a dangerous sign.
I mean, surely for Israel, tactically at least, it doesn't make sense to treat Christians and Christian Palestinians and Muslim Palestinians the same. I mean, you would think that they would want to create some sort of texture to the way they treat different Palestinians as a way of garnering some opinions and positive opinion from the West. These are the terrorists, but these are the good guys. Why is it that they treat all Palestinians the same?
Well, number one, why they treat them all the same is because the ultimate goal is to rid the land of all Palestinians. Really, any foreign influence. But I think, I think of my early years, I think there were attempts to try to draw a divide between Palestinian, Muslim, and Christian in order to have them, not unite with each other. For example, there is no state of Palestine, right? Israel controls the border, the paths before, so they give permits for people to be able to work, which are not given at all now. But one way they would have sort of tried to create the divide is maybe favor Christians receiving permits or the length of time that they receive them. But that didn't go anywhere. I remember very clearly when they tried to, and people would basically say, yeah, we understand what they're trying to do. So that never happened where they created any kind of divide. Yeah, of course, logically, there might have been even a misreading of Christianity, in that because they had such a strong connection with the evangelicals and thinking that's the Christian voice, that they didn't realize that, these Christians that actually live in Palestine are not the ones that you guys are using for your political purposes.
Yeah. You would think that an attack on Christianity in the Holy Land would inevitably provoke outrage in America and across Western Europe, but it doesn't. It hardly makes the news today. Like, why is that, do you think?
Well, I think I'll try to give credit to the people in America, is that they've been force-fed this narrative for so long that they don't know the truth.
Yeah.
And so, like we said before already, no reporters in Gaza, inhibiting the social media. And so that's why people have been reluctant to come out. But then, quite frankly, it's disturbing to me. I want to be careful if I even want to say this. I'm a member of the Greek Orthodox Church, and the largest communities in the United States are the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. The head bishop of that church is not allowing me to speak in Greek Orthodox churches. Not my bishop. I'm part of the more traditional part, but he isn't. I think it'll probably change when enough Americans and enough mainstream Christians are going to say, they put their finger to the wind. Unfortunately, too much of the institutional church is cautious, whether it's for business reasons or trying to be on the right side. Unfortunately.
And so he's not allowing you to speak because of your advocacy for Palestine.
Yeah, because and the frustration for me, and the reason that my life should be one living in my cell and in prayer, not outward. But I lived there, and I've seen it for the 25 years. So I have to speak out, because I don't want even the churches to feel that just putting a Band-Aid on the wound is enough. It's when they have called, they'll say, what's happening in Gaza, and we have to donate money. But that's like enabling an alcoholic. Basically, what we're just kicking the problem down the road. And like I said, the situation has become so critical. And even for his fellow Orthodox Christians in Palestine, that if we don't speak out and if we don't push to advocate and change the political situation, then we're going to have no longer a Christian witness in the land of Christ.
I mean, Israel often presents itself as a protector of Judeo-Christian values, and we hear this term used time and time again in America, in particular amongst the American right, but also amongst the left, that, we represent a Judeo-Christian world. And so this framing seems to exclusively define the West from a perspective of this combination of these two religions and excluding others, including Islam.
Right.
I mean, how do you understand this framing and the way in which it's maybe politically used?
I think it is actually just a political artifice.
Right.
There is no Judeo-Christian values, in a sense. Like we've been discussing, actually, I think we'll find a lot more connection between Islam and Christianity than Judaism. Yeah. So I think it was a device. It really came into prominence in the 1950s. So it was a way, and I think it was a sneaky way of sort of equating Israel and U.S. as sort of being on the same wavelength. Yeah. And just as they say, is that Israel being the only democracy of the Middle East, right? So both in a religious sense and a political sense, somehow they're tied together. It's just another false narrative.
I mean, Mother Agapia, how did a modern evangelical theology about Israel come to dominate Western Christian attitudes of the Holy Land, while the ancient Christians of the Holy Land almost become invisible when it comes to people like you, people who've got these strong conscience, about right and wrong, because it seems to me, as someone who, just on a general level, who believes in a faith, who believes in Islam, how can it be that there are religious people who turn a blind eye to genocide and to sort of the brutality that takes place in the West Bank?
Yes. Yeah, I think it stems from, it's a little difficult for me to talk to, because I'm not from an evangelical or Protestant background. So it's hard for me to even understand where they're coming from sometimes. But so all I can tell you from reading and knowing is that, first of all, you're actually seeing many Protestants, still small percentage-wise, converting to Orthodox Christianity, because the reality is Protestantism in its whole has rejected so much of the history of the church.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the problem, is that these Christian evangelicals take their information from a theology that was only developed in the 1800s. Right. So we start that way. But then the more critical thing is, so that Christian evangelical and this idea of the rapture and of coming up was a theology that has nothing to do with the original Christianity, right? But then it was captured by the political right. In the 1970s in America, these books became very popular. Left Behind, Hal Lindsey, and Tim, and Americans became captivated by the idea of the rapture and bringing on the Third World War.
The
But at the
rapture
same
being-
time, the rapture being that that in their belief system, we believe that Christ is going to come, but that will be the end of the world and the judgment, right? But for them, it's the idea that there will be the rapture. They'll be taken up to heaven, and then there'll be a 1,000-year kingdom on this earth. And the Jews that did not convert to believing in Christ will perish.
Right.
Okay, so and for that reason, they have to build a third temple so that Christ can come. That's what their theology is all wrapped up in, which is is simply a false, what we call a heresy. It has nothing to do with traditional Christianity.
Yeah.
But the thing was that it became very popular in the United States, and the right wing, the preachers like Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell, they became linked with Republican and conservative politics. So the power of those worshipers got votes for the Republicans. So that's where it became popular in one way, and that they can't even see the truth of what Christianity really is and what they should be following. And also, and like we said before, is that America was sort of fell for the dream or the myth of what Israel was. So even Catholics and some Orthodox will think, well, of course we have to support Israel, not in a theological sense like the Christian evangelicals, but in a sense that, well, yeah, that was the land where Jesus came from, and also too, particularly Orthodox, we witness our faith by how you live personally. It's not aggressive and missionary. So I think maybe that was a mistake for too many years now, to sort of humbly bear what was happening and not speaking out more, enduring the cross.
So your church, broadly the Orthodox Church, I mean, you said earlier on that they've silenced you from speaking.
Yeah, it's not. I want to be careful because within Orthodoxy, even I'm part of we have different sort of administrative section, and I'm part of the church that is more traditional. So not my bishop, but the most popular or the greatest number are in the Greek Archdiocese, Greek Orthodox, and the Archbishop Elpidophoros, who's the head of that church. My family grew up in that church, was very prominent members of that church. I was supposed to speak my father was the dean of a cathedral in New York City, and I was supposed to speak there in March and was not allowed to speak.
Really?
And in many churches throughout the South, I had talks lined up, and then the Archbishop did not allow it. I hope that he'll change his mind, because the most effective thing is that people don't understand what's happening. I did have a chance before the ban came to speak at one church, and it was actually where it was an event where they came later. They were actually in the church, and the priest said, "I'm not going to give a sermon. We're going to have a discussion in the front of the church at the end." So it was a captive audience. But he said, it was quieter and more reverent than on Holy Friday, our most solemn day. And afterwards, so many people came up to you. This was October of 2025. They didn't even know, most of them, about what had happened at St. Porphyrius Orthodox Church, where 17 Christians were killed when an Israeli missile hit the church. So they were so ignorant, but when they begin to know, hearing it from someone that's been there, then they say, "My goodness, why have we let this happen?" So that's so critical to get that message to everybody, and we're being denied.
I mean, often the way in which Americans and Western Europeans and just Westerners in general, they characterize the Palestinian struggle is through the prism of a bogeyman, and the bogeyman is Hamas.
Right.
Hamas is and I think for most people in the West, probably Hamas, is another form of Al Qaeda. It's a sort of it's a radical extremist organization. I mean, have you ever met someone from Hamas, and can you tell us a little bit about?
To be fair, I can't say, because I lived most of my life in the West Bank.
Yeah.
So directly knowing someone identifying from Hamas, I would say no. But through conversations with Gaza Christians, again, I don't want to whitewash things. I think particularly in the early stages of Hamas governing Gaza, there were instances where they tried to compel Christians or were antagonistic towards them. But in general, I would say Hamas is just a continuation of all the resistance movements against the occupation.
Right.
It's just colored by just like in England, right? You have the St. George Cross. So for Christian countries, their armies have a color of their religion.
Yeah.
So I would say with Hamas, it's the same thing. The main thing is to resist the occupation, not to compel or to force their religion on someone else. And it wasn't Hamas, but when I was at the school in Bethany, Al-Azhariya, we had a couple teachers who ran for office in 2005, I think were the elections. And their party was not called Hamas, but it definitely was an Islamic party. But I would have voted for them.
Really?
Because their purpose was to care for their people. They weren't corrupt. They wanted to make sure that they had services that, the acts of governance, that people had decent roads and the medical services and things they needed. And that's what they were about.
Right. Okay. And so, and you didn't feel that the sort of temperament of the religious factions of Palestinian society was sort of antagonistic towards others and towards the world, and
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And possibly because it's in Jerusalem, which is such, the whole world comes to Jerusalem. But
Yeah.
also we're talking all throughout the West Bank.
Yeah.
Palestinian Muslims and Christians are there living together. Yeah. Never did I feel a sense that ISIS type of mentality. In fact, it was very painful for me to come back to the United States in the early 2000s. I would go to visit the family, after the Iraq War had started. And I felt like I was in this bizarre land. The people, they have no understanding of what they're talking about.
Earlier on, you mentioned St. George's Cross, and of course, in Britain, we've got a very, very strong, like across the West, a very strong sort of anti-immigration, right-wing movement that's brewing, and they usually use St. George as sort of the symbol of their anti-immigration, anti-migrant sort of rhetoric. And of course, they fly the St. George's flag, and it's usually hung around.
You know where St. George is from.
Well, tell us, yes.
And I just had someone send me today, we won't be able to show it, in front of every Palestinian house is the icon of St. George is engraved into the wall, because he's buried in, his tomb is in Lid, next to the airport now,
Right.
in Palestine. And I remember when I was there in September, there's a wonderful Muslim doctor from the Shafat refugee camp in East Jerusalem. He grew up in Lid. His family was forced from there to move from there. And he remembers as a young man, he's in his 70s now, where St. George's tomb is. He was from there. His family would go there on the celebration of St. George. So that's actually not your question, but it's just ironic that St. George comes from Palestine and is honored by the Christians and the Muslims there.
Yeah. Yeah. We've looked in awe at the steadfastness of the people of Palestine, and especially those in Gaza, as they've endured this horrific genocidal attack against them. Just tell me a little bit about the Palestinians you encountered, and what is it about them that allows them to persevere in such a steadfast way when the recipients of such horrific genocide, really.
I think that's that rootedness to the land and the connection. I think it is almost a spiritual connection because, like I said, what is the legacy?
Yeah.
Even if so there's that sense that permeates that, we lived here and we will continue to live here.
Yeah.
If I may, actually, I'll take a quote. There's a young man who's a priest in Bethlehem. His family has been there for generations, for centuries.
Yeah.
He became a priest, and he sort of answered that question is, I pray for people to understand their faith, why he stays there, to understand exactly what they want from their own life, and even though they're under the most difficult situation, the occupation. When people don't have freedom, they're in the equivalent of a prison, and that's not what Bethlehem was meant to be. I pray for God's strength for me to be in the place where Jesus was born, a place where I've been to bring more people to their faith and refresh their minds and souls. I'm happy because I have the strength from God to fight for my people, to fight for my church, to get people to stay. And, when I had the interview with Tucker, I referred to a man who was sitting on top of his smashed car because when the Israelis came into Bethlehem, there was wanton violence and destruction. They weren't fighting against militants. They just wanted to destroy anything in their path. So they would make a game of their tanks rolling over cars for no reason.
Right.
So Father Issa's father, I have a photo of him smiling and sitting on top of his smashed car. And just say, you did it, but we'll get another one and we'll go on.
Right.
So why that happens is just, I was just I was at a talk in New Mexico, and there's a family that's actually from Bet Jala, the mother. And she said something, yes, they've been in America for 10 years now, but how much they miss Palestine. And I think that's because the land still has something, both in, how they've sustained itself, Muslims and Christians. I mentioned that before, is that we put our trust in God in everything. And I think that's something that's so much that the West is missing.
Right.
We become so empty. And when you have a faith and a belief, that sustains you, that you'll carry on. And also that world concept is still so strong there.
Yeah.
Where you come to the West, you may have a nice home now and some comforts, material comforts, but there's something lacking in the soul. And I think that's the kind of thing that keeps them, that wants them to remain in that holy land.
I mean, do you think this is part of the othering that takes place when it comes to the Palestinians? Especially amongst the left in particular. Sometimes, we see that among some Democrats. For sure, there is the right wing in America have these xenophobic views. At least some of them have these views, which and Palestine, they articulate Palestine in as they frame Palestine as sort of the other, but. I would, a lot of the progressives, sometimes I find them, they just can't understand the religiousness of Palestinians. And for them, they're almost interpreting their religion as fervor, and it's a form of, and so they need to be liberated exactly from this sort of religious fervor and whatever. Is that a fair way of describing?
I won't say who said it, but I was with a Palestinian cleric not long ago, and he speaks often, and he defends the Palestinian rights, and he works with religious groups, and it's been mostly progressive ones in the United States. But he also feels a disconnect with them because on cultural issues and the way they speak, it doesn't really relate to his life as a Christian and what he believes. But you make that alliance because for the greater cause of just bringing political freedom to the Palestinians so that they can live as they choose. Yeah, it's I wouldn't say it's a problem, but it's definitely there that they, even though they're working together, they don't really understand each other all the time. Yeah.
Remember, Agapia, can I ask you about your own faith? I mean, you're an American, you're a Greek Orthodox nun. What is it that brought you to become a nun and then to work in Palestine?
Right. Well, the main thing was, even though I grew up my father was a priest in the Orthodox Church, so we were nominally, we were Orthodox, we were Christians, but it was really in college. I actually went to study political science with the idea of being a lawyer, to work on social justice issues
in America,
or Peace Corps. I love the idea of going around the world. I'm 65 years old. Peace Corps was something relevant at that time. But for the helping others was always something within me. But then I remember being a junior in college and studying political theory, and something inside was telling me, this isn't enough. This isn't the answer I'm looking for. So I grew deeper in my faith. That led me to become a nun. I started out as a nun in upstate New York. But then our communities, I was actually part of the Russian Orthodox Church, but that's another thing now. And they had 2 convents on the Mount of Olives, right across from the Dome of the Rock. So I became a nun and joined that community because what I felt was for myself, such a closeness. I wanted to devote all my time to thinking about God. In reality, my life should be in a cell and not really being part of the world. But, I keep a quote. There was a monk from the country of Georgia, who only died in 1995, lived under communism. And he said, woe to the monk or nun who does not feel the pain of his countrymen. And so that's always motivated me too, even though I'm called to a solitary life. Circumstances brought me to be seeing the troubles of Palestine became my people in a way. I remember walking down the street in Al-Azariya after being there for a couple of years, and I'm walking home, and something just clicked, like, this is home.
Really?
So those are my people, and I have to speak out.
And from where you're sitting, do you think that the message is getting through?
I do believe so, yeah. for example, I'll be in Washington this week. There's a network of mainstream Christian coming together now. So that's just one other voice adding to, and I told you I was just with members of Doctors Against Genocide, group of medical professionals in the United States. They were just had 500 of them at the Hill a couple of weeks ago, and they plan on going every month. So the tide is beginning to turn, and I have hope that that we will work and change and bring dignity and freedom to the Palestinians.
Reverend Agapia, I'm really honored to have you with us today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. Careless.
Assalamu alaikum. Now you've reached the end of this show, and the fact that you've stayed until the very end tells me that you truly believe in our work. Please consider making a one-off donation or becoming a member by visiting thinkingmuslim.com/membership. Now your contributions give you exclusive behind-the-scenes access and the ability to ask questions to our guests, and monthly calls with myself, my team, and our guests like Sami Hamdi. Jazakallah khair, and keep us in your